The autumn leaves crunched under my feet as I walked up the stone pathway to my son's colonial-style home, the familiar weight of anticipation heavy in my chest. The October air carried the scent of wood smoke from neighboring chimneys, and I could hear the distant sound of children's laughter echoing from the backyard. I had driven the 23 miles from my apartment in downtown Hartford to this quiet suburban neighborhood in West Hartford, just as I had every Sunday for the past 2 years since my granddaughter Emma was born. But today felt different. Today, there was a knot in my stomach that had been growing tighter with each passing week. What I'm about to tell you is absolutely true and will leave you speechless. Please like and subscribe. Tell me which city you call home. My name is Margaret Bell. I'm 59 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the kind of relationship with my adult children that every mother dreams of. I raised 3 kids as a single mother after my divorce, working double shifts as a nurse at Hartford Hospital to keep food on the table and clothes on their backs. My youngest son, David, now 31, had always been my gentle soul, the peacemaker among his siblings, the one who called me every Wednesday evening just to check in. David met his wife Rachel when they were both working at an insurance company in downtown Hartford. Rachel seemed nice enough at first, though I always sensed a certain coolness in her interactions with me. She had this way of smiling that never quite reached her eyes when I was around, and she often found reasons to busy herself in the kitchen or with household tasks whenever I visited. But I chalked it up to the natural adjustment period that comes when a new person joins a close-knit family. The front door opened before I could even ring the bell, and David appeared with 2-year-old Emma balanced on his hip. His sandy brown hair was disheveled, and there were dark circles under his hazel eyes that reminded me so much of his father. Emma's face lit up when she saw me, her chubby arms reaching out as she babbled, "Gamma! Gamma!" in that precious way that made my heart melt every single time. "Hey, Mom," David said, but there was something strained in his voice. He kissed my cheek as I took Emma into my arms, breathing in that sweet baby smell of Johnson's shampoo and graham crackers. "Rachel's in the living room. We need to talk to you about something." The knot in my stomach tightened. Those words, delivered in that careful tone, never preceded good news. I had heard variations of them throughout my career when delivering difficult diagnoses to patients' families, and I recognized the weight they carried. The living room was exactly as Rachel had decorated it, all beiges and muted blues with carefully arranged throw pillows that no one was actually supposed to throw. Family photos lined the mantelpiece above the brick fireplace, but I noticed there were fewer pictures of me with the grandchildren than there used to be. Rachel sat on the edge of the cream-colored sofa, her blonde hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing the kind of casual outfit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Margaret," she said, not bothering to stand up. She had never called me Mom, despite my gentle suggestions over the years. "Please, sit down." My older daughter, Sarah, had driven up from her home in New Haven that morning, and I was surprised to see her car in the driveway when I arrived. At 35, Sarah had inherited my stubborn streak along with my dark hair and no-nonsense attitude. She worked as a project manager at a construction company, and she had always been fiercely protective of our family. Sarah was sitting in the armchair across from Rachel, and I could tell by the set of her shoulders that she was not happy about whatever conversation was about to unfold. "What's going on?" I asked, settling onto the sofa with Emma still in my lap. The little girl was playing with my necklace, completely oblivious to the tension that was practically vibrating through the room. David cleared his throat and remained standing, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Mom, we've been talking, and Rachel and I have decided that we need to set some new boundaries around visits with Emma and the new baby." I blinked, processing his words. Rachel was 6 months pregnant with their second child, and I had been looking forward to being even more involved as a grandmother. What kind of boundaries? Well, Rachel interjected, her voice taking on that artificially sweet tone she used when she was about to say something particularly cutting. We've noticed that you can be somewhat unpredictable in your behavior, and we feel it would be best if you weren't left alone with the children anymore. The words hit me like a physical blow. Unpredictable. The accusation hung in the air between us, and I felt my cheeks flush with a mixture of embarrassment and anger. Emma chose that moment to grab a handful of my hair and tug, making her delighted giggling sound, completely unaware that my world was tilting off its axis. Unpredictable how? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah leaned forward in her chair, her dark eyes flashing with indignation. This is ridiculous, David. Mom has been babysitting Emma every other weekend for 2 years without a single incident. She raised 3 children successfully. She's a registered nurse with decades of experience, and Emma absolutely adores her. The trap I'd missed finally sprang shut. David shifted uncomfortably, his jaw tightening in a way that reminded me painfully of his father during our worst arguments. Mom, you know what I'm talking about. Last month, when you were watching Emma, you took her to the emergency room because you thought she had appendicitis? It turned out to be gas. The heat in my cheeks intensified. She was crying inconsolably and clutching her stomach. As a nurse, I know the signs, and I wasn't going to take any chances with my granddaughter's health. But you didn't call us first, Rachel said, adjusting her position on the couch with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to pregnancy discomfort. We came home to find a note saying you'd rushed her to the hospital. Do you have any idea how terrifying that was? Emma had grown tired of my necklace and was now attempting to climb down from my lap to explore the coffee table. I helped her down gently, watching as she toddled toward a basket of toys in the corner. The simple act of caring for her felt natural, instinctive, and the suggestion that I couldn't be trusted alone with her felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Sarah stood up abruptly, her construction worker's boots making a sharp sound against the hardwood floor. So she erred on the side of caution. That's what any responsible caregiver would do. Would you rather she ignored Emma's distress? That's not the only incident, David said, his voice growing defensive. Mom, you remember the playground situation 2 weeks ago? I felt my stomach drop. The playground. I had been watching Emma at the small park near David's house when another child, maybe 4 years old, had pushed Emma off the swing. Emma had fallen hard, scraping her knee, and the other child's father had been completely dismissive when I approached him. I may have raised my voice. I may have used some colorful language that I later regretted. That man's child hurt Emma, and he refused to even acknowledge it, I said, hearing the defensive edge creep into my own voice. I stood up for my granddaughter. You screamed at a stranger in front of a playground full of children, Rachel said coolly. Emma was crying not just from her scraped knee, but because you were shouting. Several parents gathered around, and Emma was clearly upset by your reaction. The room fell silent except for Emma's cheerful babbling as she pulled toys from the basket. The afternoon light streaming through the living room windows seemed too bright, too cheerful for the conversation we were having. I could smell the lingering scent of whatever expensive candle Rachel had been burning, something with vanilla and cedar that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. Sarah sat back down, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were clenched in her lap. David, you're being completely unreasonable. Mom was protecting Emma in both situations. I'm being unreasonable? David's voice cracked slightly, and for a moment, He looked like the little boy who used to run to me when he'd had a nightmare. Rachel is 6 months pregnant. We're about to have 2 small children, and we need to know that the people caring for them will make calm, rational decisions. The word rational stung more than I expected it to. I had always prided myself on being level-headed, practical. During my 30-year nursing career, I had handled countless emergencies with steady hands and clear thinking. I had raised 3 children through scraped knees, broken bones, teenage rebellions, and college applications. The suggestion that I was somehow unfit now felt like an attack on everything I had built my identity around. Rachel reached for a glass of water on the side table, her wedding ring catching the light. "We're not saying you're a bad grandmother, Margaret. Emma loves you, and we can see that. But we need boundaries. Supervised visits only, at least until after the new baby is born and we can reassess." "Supervised visits?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Like I'm some kind of threat to my own grandchildren. Emma had found a small wooden truck in the toy basket and was now pushing it along the floor, making little engine noises. She looked up at me and grinned, her face lighting up with pure joy. The innocence in that smile made my heart ache. She had no idea that the adults in her life were discussing whether her grandmother could be trusted to care for her. Sarah leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. "David, this is Mom we're talking about, the woman who stayed up all night when you had pneumonia in 3rd grade, who drove to your college at 2 a.m. when you called drunk and scared sophomore year, who helped you and Rachel move into this house when Rachel was pregnant with Emma and couldn't lift anything heavy." But as I sat there, watching my granddaughter play and feeling the weight of my son's judgment, I realized there was something I hadn't told them about the emergency room visit. Something that had been eating at me for weeks, making me question my own judgment in ways that terrified me more than I wanted to admit. The silence stretched between us, filled only with Emma's soft truck noises and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I could feel 3 pairs of adult eyes on me, waiting. The weight of what I hadn't told them pressed against my chest, like a physical thing. "There's something else about that day at the hospital," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Something I didn't mention." David straightened in his chair, and I saw Rachel's hand instinctively move to her belly, protective and worried. Sarah reached over and touched my arm gently. "What happened, Mom?" I took a shaky breath, remembering that awful moment of confusion that had haunted me for weeks. When the nurse called Emma's name in the waiting room, I almost didn't respond. For maybe 10 seconds, I couldn't remember why we were there. I looked down at her in my lap, saw the bump on her head, and for those few seconds, I had no idea how it had happened. The words hung in the air like a confession. Emma pushed her truck over to David's feet, oblivious to the tension crackling around her. He picked her up absently, his eyes never leaving my face. "It came back to me," I continued, my hands trembling slightly. "The swing, the fall, everything. But those 10 seconds?" I looked at my granddaughter, now contentedly settled in her father's arms. What if it had been something more serious? What if I had forgotten something important to tell the doctor? Rachel leaned forward, her expression softer now, but still concerned. "Margaret, you were stressed. Emergency rooms are overwhelming places. Anyone could have a moment like that." "Could they?" I asked, and I heard the fear in my own voice that I'd been trying to suppress for weeks. Or is this the beginning of something? My mother started forgetting little things when she was my age. Nothing dramatic at first, just moments of confusion that everyone brushed off as normal aging. Sarah's grip on my arm tightened. One confused moment doesn't mean you're following in Grandma's footsteps. "You've been under a lot of stress lately with Dad's retirement," The move to the smaller house, all the changes. But David was studying me with that intense look he'd inherited from his father, the one that saw straight through any attempt at deflection. "How long has this been bothering you?" "Since it happened," I admitted. "Every day I replay those 10 seconds. I've been second-guessing every decision, every moment with Emma. Maybe you're not wrong about me being unpredictable. Maybe I'm not the grandmother I used to be." Emma reached for her truck again, and David set her down gently. She returned to her quiet play, but I noticed how he kept one eye on her, always watching, always ready to intervene. Was that how he saw me now? As another child who needed monitoring? "I've been having other moments too," I found myself saying, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Small things. Forgetting where I put my car keys, walking into a room, and not remembering what I went in for. Last week, I couldn't remember if I'd locked the front door and had to go back and check 3 times. The confession hung between us, and I realized that this was what had been building for months. Not just David's concerns about my parenting choices, but my own growing fears about my capabilities, my reliability, my future. Rachel shifted uncomfortably, one hand still resting on her pregnant belly. "Those sound like normal things that happen when you're stressed or tired." "Or they're early warning signs," I said quietly. "And if they are, then maybe David is right to be protective. Maybe I shouldn't be alone with Emma until we know for sure what's happening to me." The room fell silent except for the soft sounds of Emma playing with her truck. I watched my granddaughter's small hands manipulate the toy wheels, her concentration absolute and pure. When had I started doubting my own mind? When had confidence been replaced by this constant questioning? David cleared his throat, and when I looked up, his expression had changed. The defensive tension from earlier had melted into something I recognized from his childhood, that thoughtful look he'd get when trying to work through a complicated math problem. "Mom, can I ask you something? And I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "When you have these moments, forgetting where you put something, or walking into a room and not remembering why, how do you feel afterward? Are you confused about what happened, or do you remember the forgetting?" I considered his question carefully. "I remember it. That's what makes it so frustrating. I'll be looking for my keys, getting more and more frantic, and then I'll find them in the refrigerator or somewhere completely illogical. And I'll think back, trying to remember putting them there, but I can't." Sarah nodded slowly. "That happened to me constantly when I was studying for the bar exam. I was so scattered from stress that I'd put coffee mugs in the pantry and cereal in the dishwasher." "But you were young," I said. "This feels different." Rachel had been listening intently, and now she spoke up. "Margaret, my grandmother had dementia. The difference was, she didn't remember forgetting. She'd put her purse in the oven and then swear someone had moved it. She couldn't recognize that her memory had gaps." David was watching Emma again, but I could see him processing what Rachel had said. "Mom, tell me about that day in the emergency room again. But this time, don't focus on the 10 seconds you can't remember. Tell me about everything else." I frowned, not understanding where he was going with this. "What do you mean?" "You said you blanked out for 10 seconds, but you also got Emma to the hospital. You gave them her information. You called me. Walk me through all of that." I closed my eyes, letting myself relive that terrifying afternoon. Emma was playing in the backyard when she fell. I heard her crying and ran outside. She was holding her arm, and I could see immediately that it was bent wrong. I didn't panic. I scooped her up carefully, supporting her arm, and carried her to the car. You knew to support the injury, David said quietly. Yes, of course. Then I drove to the emergency room. I remember thinking that traffic was unusually heavy and taking the back route through the residential streets because it would be faster. I opened my eyes, looking at David. I called you from the parking lot while I was getting Emma out of her car seat. Then I carried her into the emergency room and went straight to the triage nurse. Sarah was leaning forward now, interested. What did you tell the nurse? I gave her Emma's full name, birth date, your contact information, and told her about the fall. I described exactly how Emma had landed and what I'd observed about the injury. The memory was crystal clear, and as I recounted it, I felt some of my anxiety beginning to ease. The nurse complimented me on how calm and thorough I was. David set his coffee cup down and looked directly at me. Mom, you handled an emergency perfectly. You made good decisions under pressure. You gave accurate information. You got Emma the help she needed quickly and efficiently. But those 10 seconds happened after you'd successfully managed a crisis. He interrupted. You were coming down from an adrenaline rush, you were in a stressful environment, and your granddaughter was hurt. Having a moment of disorientation doesn't negate everything you did right. Emma abandoned her truck and toddled over to me, raising her arms to be picked up. I lifted her onto my lap, and she immediately snuggled against my chest, her tiny hand playing with the buttons on my sweater. The trust in that simple gesture made my throat tight with emotion. I've been so scared, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Not just of something being wrong with me, but of losing this. Of losing my relationship with Emma, with any future grandchildren. Of becoming someone you can't trust. Rachel reached over and squeezed my free hand. You're not losing anything, but maybe it's time to stop carrying this fear alone. David shifted in his chair, and I could see him struggling with something. Finally, he spoke. Mom, I owe you an apology. When I said you were unpredictable, I wasn't talking about dementia or memory problems. I was talking about your parenting style compared to how Rachel and I do things. I looked up at him, confused. What do you mean? Like letting Emma climb the big slide at the playground when we usually stick to the toddler equipment, or giving her ice cream before dinner when we have strict meal schedules, or teaching her to use scissors when we think she's too young. He ran his hand through his hair, looking embarrassed. I called it unpredictable, but really, it was just different from our approach. And maybe I was feeling threatened by how much Emma loves spending time with you. Sarah was staring at her brother with a mixture of surprise and something that looked like pride. David, that's a very mature thing to admit. I've been thinking about it since our last conversation. Mom, you raised 2 kids who turned out pretty well, if I do say so myself. You have good judgment, and Emma is always happy and safe when she comes home from your house. He paused, watching his daughter contentedly settled in my arms. I think I was so focused on being the perfect parent that I forgot you're not just a babysitter. You're her grandmother. You should get to have your own relationship with her. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but it was mixed with lingering uncertainty. But what if there really is something wrong with my memory? What if these episodes get worse? Then we'll deal with it together, David said firmly. But we'll deal with facts, not fears. Have you talked to your doctor about your concerns? I shook my head. I was afraid of what she might say. Or what she might not say, Rachel added gently. Sometimes not knowing is scarier than knowing. Emma had fallen asleep against my chest, her breathing deep and even. I looked down at her peaceful face, then back at David. If I make an appointment with Dr. Chen, if I get these concerns checked out properly, would you consider letting me watch Emma alone again? David exchanged a look with Rachel, and she nodded slightly. Yes, he said, but I have one condition. My heart sank, waiting for whatever restriction he was about to impose. I want you to promise me that if you're ever feeling confused or unsure about something when you're with Emma, you'll call me immediately. Not because I don't trust you, but because we're a team. We're both looking out for her. I can live with that, I said, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe properly. Sarah smiled, but then her expression grew more serious. There's something else we should probably talk about. Something I noticed today when you were telling us about your memory concerns. We all looked at her expectantly, and I felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. What had I missed? What other sign of decline had I revealed without realizing it? You said you've been having these worries for months, but you never mentioned them to any of us. Mom, you've always been the person who held our family together, who solved everyone else's problems. But maybe it's time you learned how to let us help you with yours. The truth of her words hit me unexpectedly hard. She was right. I had been carrying this fear alone, just like I'd carried so many other burdens over the years. The idea of being vulnerable, of admitting I might need support, felt foreign and uncomfortable. I don't know how to do that, I said honestly. David stood up and moved to the couch, settling beside me carefully so as not to wake Emma. Maybe we can figure it out together. Starting with that doctor's appointment. I nodded, but as I looked around at the three of them, my children who had become adults when I wasn't paying attention, Rachel who had become like a daughter to me, I realized there was still something I hadn't told them, something that had been weighing on me even more than the memory concerns. There's something else, I said, and saw them all tense slightly. Something I need to tell you about why I've been so scared of losing time with Emma. The room fell silent except for Emma's soft breathing and the distant hum of the refrigerator. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting, and I realized that after months of isolation and fear, I was finally ready to share the deepest part of my worry. When your father died, I began, my voice barely above a whisper. I promised myself I wouldn't burden you children with my loneliness. You all had your own lives to build, your own families to focus on. But these past few months, watching you pull away, David, seeing less of Emma. I paused, stroking my granddaughter's hair. I realized that she might be slipping away from me, just like everything else has. Sarah leaned forward in her chair. Mom, we're not going anywhere. But you are, I said, and the words came out sharper than I intended. That's what's supposed to happen. You're supposed to grow up and build your own lives. I'm supposed to become less central to your world. I understand that. I really do. But the thought of losing my connection with Emma because of something I can't control, something happening in my own mind? I shifted Emma gently in my arms, and she stirred, but didn't wake. Every time I forgot something or said something that didn't make sense, I could see David calculating whether I was safe to leave her with. And I don't blame him for that, but it made me realize that my relationship with Emma might have an expiration date I never saw coming. David's face was pained. Mom, that's not what I wanted. I never meant to make you feel like you were running out of time with her. I know you didn't, but that's what it felt like. I looked around at all three of them. Your father and I, we always talked about the grandchildren we'd spoil someday, the memories we'd make with them. He died before Emma was born, And I've been so desperate to create those memories for both of us. Maybe too desperate. Rachel spoke up quietly. Is that why you seemed so anxious whenever we had to cut visits short? Even when it was just for normal reasons like nap time? I nodded, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. I started counting every minute, 20 minutes here, an hour there. I was keeping track like they were rationed, like I had to hoard them because there might not be many left. The admission hung in the air, and I realized how exhausting it had been to carry that weight alone. Emma shifted against me, making a small sound in her sleep, and I automatically adjusted my hold on her. Sarah stood up and came over to kneel beside the couch. Mom, do you remember when I was going through my divorce 2 years ago? And you told me that fear makes us do things that push away the very people we're trying to hold on to? I looked at her, seeing the gentle irony in her expression. I remember. Maybe it's time you took your own advice. David cleared his throat. I need you to know something too, Mom. These past few weeks, Emma has asked for you every single day. Where's Grandma? When is Grandma coming? I've been so focused on what might go wrong that I forgot to consider what was definitely going wrong. She was missing you. My eyes filled with tears I'd been holding back for weeks. She really asked for me? Every day, Rachel confirmed. David's been worried sick about it. He knew he'd made a mistake, but he didn't know how to fix it without compromising Emma's safety. I looked at David, who was staring down at his hands. I've been scared too, Mom. Not just of leaving Emma with you, but of losing you gradually, piece by piece. When you seemed confused or forgetful, it reminded me that someday you might not remember who we are, who she is, and I didn't know how to deal with that possibility. So we were both running from the same fear? I said softly. Looks like it, he agreed. But maybe we can face it together instead. Emma stirred in my arms and opened her eyes, looking up at me with that sleepy confusion children get when they wake up in unexpected places. Grandma? I'm right here, sweetheart. She smiled and snuggled closer. I dreamed about you. We were making cookies. Would you like to make real cookies soon? Tomorrow? She asked hopefully. I looked at David, who was watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was love there, and worry, but also something that looked like resolution. We'll see, I told Emma, which was an answer that felt honest for the first time in months. But as we sat there in the comfortable silence that followed, I realized there was still one more thing I needed to tell them. Something I'd discovered about myself during these weeks of isolation that would change how they saw me and how they'd understand what I was really asking of them. I took a deep breath, feeling Emma's warm weight against me, giving me courage I didn't know I had. There's something else I need to tell you all. Something I figured out during these past few weeks when I was alone with my thoughts. Sarah settled back into her chair, and David leaned forward slightly. Rachel remained standing by the window, but I could see she was listening intently. I've been blaming my forgetfulness, my confusion, on getting older. And maybe some of it is that. But I realize that a lot of what you've been calling unpredictable behavior has been happening when I'm anxious or overwhelmed. I paused, stroking Emma's hair as she dozed against me. Like that day with the stove, I wasn't confused about how to cook, David. I was panicked because Emma had been crying for 20 minutes and nothing I did seemed to help her. David's face changed. She was crying? You didn't mention that. Because I was embarrassed. I used to be able to comfort crying babies. I raised 2 of them, after all. I looked between David and Sarah. But Emma was inconsolable, and I was so afraid you'd think I couldn't handle her that I kept trying to do normal things, like start dinner, while she was screaming. That's when I put the empty pot on the burner. I was distracted by worry, not confused by age. Sarah nodded slowly. That makes sense, Mom. When I'm stressed, I do absent-minded things too. Last week I put my keys in the refrigerator because I was worried about Emma missing you so much. And the day I couldn't remember if I'd taken my medication, I continued. That was the morning after you'd told me you needed to reassess our arrangement, David. I'd been up all night worried about what that meant. When you're that anxious, your mind doesn't work the way it should. Rachel turned from the window. Have you considered that maybe you're not declining as much as you're reacting? To stress, to fear, to the changes in your relationship with your family? That's exactly what I've been thinking about, I said. Don't get me wrong. I know I'm not 30 anymore. My memory isn't perfect, and I do get tired more easily. But I think what you've been seeing as unpredictable behavior has mostly been me trying to hide how scared I was of losing all of you. David ran his hands through his hair. God, Mom. So when I started treating you like you were incompetent, that probably made everything worse. It created a cycle, I agreed. The more worried I became about proving myself, the more mistakes I made. And the more mistakes I made, the more convinced you became that I couldn't be trusted. Emma shifted in my arms and mumbled something about cookies in her sleep. The sound made us all smile, breaking some of the tension in the room. So, what do we do now? David asked. How do we break that cycle? We start with honesty, I said. If I'm feeling overwhelmed when I'm with Emma, I'll tell you instead of trying to push through it. And maybe you can trust me enough to tell me when you're worried instead of just pulling away. Sarah leaned forward. What would that look like practically? I mean, David's concerns weren't completely unfounded, even if they were amplified by the stress cycle. I'd been hoping someone would ask that question because I'd given it a lot of thought. I think we start small and build back up. Maybe I take Emma for a few hours while you and Rachel run errands, David. Not a whole day, not overnight yet, but long enough for both of us to remember that we trust each other. And if something goes wrong? David asked. Then we talk about it instead of you making unilateral decisions about my capabilities. I tried to keep my voice gentle but firm. I need you to remember that I'm still Emma's grandmother, not a babysitter you can fire without notice. Rachel moved to sit on the arm of David's chair. What if you had some kind of check-in system? Not because we don't trust you, but because it might help both of you feel more secure while you're rebuilding confidence. David looked thoughtful. Like what? Nothing elaborate, Rachel said. Maybe just a text when Emma gets there, and one before she goes down for her nap if it's a longer visit. Just so everyone knows things are going smoothly. I considered this. A few weeks ago, I might have been offended by the suggestion, but now I could see it for what it was. A bridge back to trust, not a permanent monitoring system. I could do that, I said, as long as we all understand it's temporary. Training wheels, not permanent restrictions. Agreed, David said immediately. And Mom, I want you to know, if you tell me you're feeling overwhelmed or need help with something, I won't see it as proof that you can't handle Emma. I'll see it as proof that you're being responsible. Emma stirred again, and this time opened her eyes fully, looking around the room with the confusion of a child who's forgotten where she is. Daddy, did I miss dinner? No, sweetheart, David said softly. We were just talking with Grandma. She looked up at me. Are you still sad, Grandma? The question caught me off guard. I was sad, baby, but I'm feeling better now. Good, she said matter-of-factly. Daddy was sad too. He kept looking at your picture on the refrigerator. David's cheeks reddened slightly, but he didn't deny it. Emma, I said carefully, would you like to come visit Grandma this weekend? We could make those cookies you dreamed about. Her face lit up. Really? Just me and you? Just you and me, I confirmed, then looked at David. If that's okay with Daddy? I think that sounds perfect, David said. But even as relief flooded through me, I caught something in Sarah's expression that made me pause. She was smiling, but there was something else there too, something that looked almost like concern. Sarah? I asked. What is it? She hesitated, glancing between David and me. I'm so glad you two are working this out. I really am. But there's something I probably should have mentioned earlier, and now I'm wondering if I should have spoken up sooner. The room fell quiet, except for Emma's soft humming as she played with the buttons on my sweater. What kind of something? David asked, and I could hear the wariness creeping back into his voice. Sarah took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her shirt. It's about last month, when you called me at 2 a.m. You were confused about where you were. You thought you were still living in your old house from when David was little? I felt the blood drain from my face. That night came rushing back to me. The disorientation, the panic, when I couldn't find the bathroom where I expected it to be. The overwhelming fear that something was terribly wrong with me. I remember, I said quietly. But Sarah, that was just one night. I'd been sick with that flu, and I was taking those cold medications that made me groggy. I know that's what you thought, Sarah said gently. And maybe that's all it was. But there have been a few other times when you've seemed not quite yourself. Little things. Like when you forgot we'd made lunch plans 3 times in 1 week, or when you asked me the same question 4 times during one phone conversation. David straightened in his chair, and I could see him processing this information. Emma had stopped humming and was looking between the adults with the intuitive awareness children have when something important is happening. Why didn't you tell me about the phone call? David asked Sarah, his voice carefully controlled. Because your mom asked me not to. She was embarrassed, and she promised she'd see her doctor about it. Which she did. Sarah looked at me for confirmation. I did, I said defensively. Dr. Martinez said it was likely the medication interaction, maybe combined with stress and not sleeping well. My blood work was fine. But did you tell him about the other episodes Sarah mentioned? David asked. I hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. Mom, David said, and I could hear the worry creeping back into his voice. This is exactly what I mean about being unpredictable. Not that you're deliberately hiding things, but that maybe you're not always aware when something's off. Emma shifted on my lap. What's wrong with Grandma? Nothing's wrong with Grandma, sweetheart, Rachel said quickly. We're just talking about how to make sure everyone stays safe and healthy. But Grandma seems sad again, Emma observed with the brutal honesty of a 5-year-old. She was right. The progress we'd just made felt like it was slipping away, and I could feel that familiar weight of isolation settling back over me. I should have been more honest, I admitted, about the confusion, about being scared. But David, I swear to you, I haven't had any episodes like that in weeks, and never when I was supposed to be watching Emma. How would you know? David asked, not unkindly, but with genuine concern. If you're having moments of confusion, would you necessarily remember them clearly? The question hung in the air like a challenge I couldn't answer. Because the truth was, I didn't know. The thought terrified me more than I was willing to admit. Sarah leaned forward. What if we approached this differently? Instead of just the check-in system, what if we had more regular family time together? Not supervised visits, but just more opportunities for everyone to spend time together naturally. You mean like family dinners? Rachel asked. Exactly. Or weekend activities? Times when you're with Emma, but David and Rachel are around too. Not watching you, just being present. It might help everyone feel more comfortable as you rebuild confidence. I wanted to object, to say that I didn't need a gradual reintroduction to my own granddaughter. But I could see David's face relaxing slightly at the suggestion, and I realized that my pride was less important than rebuilding our relationship. That could work, I said slowly. As long as it's not permanent, as long as we're working toward me having normal grandmother privileges again. Of course, David said. And Mom, I want you to promise me something. If you have any more episodes of confusion, any at all, you'll tell me. Not because I want to use it against you, but because we're family and we should be looking out for each other. I promise, I said, and meant it. Emma looked up at me with those serious dark eyes. Grandma, if you get confused, I can help you remember things. I'm good at remembering. Despite everything, I smiled. You are very good at remembering, baby. So we can still make cookies this weekend? She asked hopefully. I looked at David, who seemed to be weighing everything we'd just discussed. Maybe we could make cookies at our house instead, he suggested. That way, Mom can see how you like to help in the kitchen, and you can still have your special baking time with Grandma. It wasn't exactly what I'd hoped for, but it was something. I'd like that, I said. But even as we were making these tentative plans, I caught sight of Sarah's expression again. She still looked troubled, like there was something else she wasn't saying. Sarah, I said, there's more, isn't there? She glanced at David, then back at me. There's something else I think David should know, about the conversation we had yesterday. My stomach dropped. Yesterday's conversation with Sarah felt like a private moment of vulnerability, and now she was suggesting David needed to know about it too. I felt exposed, like everyone was analyzing my every word and action for signs of mental decline. What conversation? David asked, his voice careful but alert. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Your mother told me about some things that have been happening. Memory lapses that go beyond what she initially shared with you. I wanted to sink into the couch cushions. Sarah, we agreed that was between us. I know, and I'm sorry. But I think David needs the full picture if we're going to make this work. Sarah turned to David. She told me about forgetting conversations with you, losing track of time while Emma was with her, and some confusion about where she put things. David's expression grew more serious. Mom, is this true? Emma, who had been quietly playing with her doll, looked up with concern. Grandma, are you sick? The directness of my granddaughter's question cut through all the adult dancing around the subject. Here was a 5-year-old asking the question we were all afraid to voice directly. I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. Sometimes grown-ups forget things, and we're trying to figure out if that's what's happening with me. My teacher forgets things too, Emma said matter-of-factly. Yesterday, she forgot it was library day, and we almost missed story time. Despite the tension, I smiled. See, it happens to everyone sometimes. But David wasn't satisfied with my deflection. Mom, how long has this been going on, and why didn't you tell me everything before? I felt cornered, frustrated that my moment of honesty with Sarah was now being used against me. Because I knew you'd react exactly like this. I knew you'd worry and want to wrap me in bubble wrap. That's not fair, David said, his voice rising slightly. "You're asking me to trust you with my daughter when you're not being completely honest about what's happening." "I was trying to figure it out myself first," I protested. "I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily." Sarah held up a hand. "This is exactly why I thought David should know. You're both trying to protect each other, but it's creating more problems." Emma stood up suddenly, her small face scrunched with worry. "Stop fighting. I don't like when people fight about me." The room went quiet. My granddaughter was right. We were fighting about her, around her, and she was absorbing all of our anxiety and tension. David picked Emma up and settled her on his lap. "We're not fighting about you, sweetheart. We're just trying to figure out how to keep everyone safe and happy." "But Grandma looks sad," Emma observed with the brutal honesty of children. "And you look mad." I reached over and took Emma's small hand. "Daddy's not mad at you, and he's not really mad at me either. He's just worried because he loves us both." David sighed deeply. "Emma, do you remember when you broke your arm last year?" She nodded solemnly. "And remember how Daddy and Mommy had to make sure you were extra careful until it healed? We weren't being mean. We just wanted to make sure you stayed safe while you got better." "Am I like Emma's broken arm?" I asked, not sure if I wanted to hear the answer. "Maybe," David said gently. "And maybe just like Emma got better and could do everything normally again, you will too. But right now, we need to be careful." Emma looked between us with those serious dark eyes. "When my arm was broken, Grandma came over every day to help take care of me." "She did," David acknowledged. "So now I should help take care of Grandma while she gets better." The simple logic of a child's love brought tears to my eyes. "You are very wise, Emma." But Sarah was watching me closely. "There's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told us yet." I hesitated. There was something else, something that had been nagging at me since our conversation yesterday. "I've been having trouble sleeping, and when I do sleep, I have vivid dreams that feel completely real. Sometimes when I wake up, I'm not sure what actually happened and what was a dream." David's face went pale. "Mom, how long has that been happening?" "A few weeks, maybe longer." "The day Emma said I made her lunch twice? I honestly remember making it once, but I also have this weird memory of making it again, like a dream memory overlapping with reality." The room fell silent except for the soft sound of Emma's breathing as she leaned against her father's chest. "That changes things," Sarah said quietly. "How?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "Because if you can't distinguish between dreams and reality sometimes, then Emma's safety becomes a much more serious concern." David was quiet for a long moment, processing this new information. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with sadness and determination. "Mom, I think we need to see a doctor before we make any plans for you to be alone with Emma again." I watched David's face as the weight of my confession settled over him. The man who had been so determined to protect his daughter was now grappling with the reality that his mother might be facing something more serious than simple aging. "You're right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're right about seeing a doctor." Emma had been listening quietly, her small fingers tracing patterns on her father's shirt. "What kind of doctor?" she asked. David looked at me questioningly, and I realized this was another moment where we had to decide how much truth to share with her. "A doctor who helps people when their minds get a little confused sometimes," I explained carefully. Sarah had been unusually quiet through this exchange, but now she leaned forward. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about feeling like you're losing yourself. Maybe that's exactly why we need to fight for who you are right now, today. What do you mean? David asked. I mean, yes, absolutely see a doctor. But in the meantime, don't disappear from Emma's life completely. Maybe supervised visits aren't about punishment or mistrust. Maybe they're about staying connected while being safe. I felt a flicker of hope. You think there's a way to do both? I think there has to be, Sarah said firmly, because isolation isn't going to help anyone heal. David was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his protective instincts. What would that look like? Maybe I could come over when you're here, I suggested tentatively. We could do activities together, all of us. I could still be Grandma, just not alone. Emma brightened immediately. Like when we make cookies together? All four of us? Exactly like that, Sarah said, smiling at Emma's enthusiasm. But David's expression remained troubled. What if you have one of these episodes where you can't tell what's real? What if it happens while Emma's right there? The question hung in the air like a challenge. I wanted to promise him it wouldn't happen. Wanted to guarantee that I could control whatever was happening to my mind. But honesty had gotten us this far. Then you'll be there to help both of us, I said finally. Emma would be safe, and maybe I'd have a witness to help me sort out what really happened. David's arms tightened around Emma protectively. This is so hard, Mom. I want to believe that's enough. But what if I miss something? What if I'm distracted for just a moment and you forget where you are or who Emma is? The fear in his voice was palpable, and I realized that my confusion was traumatizing him too. He wasn't just protecting Emma. He was trying to protect himself from the possibility of losing his mother in increments. Sarah seemed to understand this too. David, you can't prevent every possible bad thing from happening. You'll drive yourself crazy trying. But I can prevent this one, he replied, his voice strained. I can make sure Emma's not put in a dangerous situation. Is loving someone always dangerous? Emma asked suddenly, her question catching us all off guard. What do you mean, sweetheart? David asked gently. Well, you love Grandma, but you're scared. And Grandma loves me, but that makes her sad because she can't see me alone. And I love both of you, but now I'm worried all the time. Is that just what love is? The profound simplicity of her observation left us speechless for a moment, out of the mouths of babes indeed. Love is scary sometimes, I admitted to Emma, but it's still worth it, even when it hurts. Especially then, Sarah said softly. David looked at his daughter with something between pride and sorrow. Emma, you shouldn't have to worry about grown-up problems. But they're my problems too, she said matter-of-factly. Grandma is my person, and you're my person, and Sarah is my person. If something affects my people, it affects me. I felt tears threatening again, but they were different this time. Not tears of frustration or fear, but of overwhelming love for this wise little girl who understood family in ways that shamed us adults. You know what? David said slowly. Maybe Emma's right. Maybe we've been thinking about this all wrong. How so? I asked. Maybe instead of trying to protect everyone from the problem, we figure out how to handle the problem together. Sarah nodded encouragingly. What does that look like to you? David took a deep breath. It looks like doctor's appointments and honest conversations, and maybe some new rules for a while. But it also looks like staying connected as a family. And cookies? Emma added hopefully. Despite everything, I found myself laughing. Yes, definitely cookies. But as the moment of lightness faded, I saw David's expression grow serious again. There's still something I need to know, Mom. These episodes where you can't tell dreams from reality, have you ever felt like you might hurt someone during them? The question I'd been dreading had finally been asked, and my answer would determine everything that came next. The question hung in the air between us like a blade. David's eyes were fixed on mine, searching for the truth he needed to hear. Emma had gone very still beside me, and I could feel Sarah holding her breath. I looked down at my hands, these hands that had braided Emma's hair just yesterday, that had held her when she was a baby, that had soothed countless scraped knees and wiped away tears. The same hands that, in my confused state 2 weeks ago, had gripped the kitchen knife while I was convinced someone was breaking into my house at 3 a.m. I need to tell you about last Tuesday night, I said quietly. The night before you decided I couldn't be alone with Emma anymore. David's jaw tightened, but he nodded for me to continue. I was dreaming, but I thought I was awake. In the dream, there were people in my house, strangers who meant to hurt us. I got up and went to the kitchen. My voice caught. I was holding a knife, David. I was standing in my living room with a knife, absolutely convinced that intruders were there. Emma's hand found mine. But there weren't really bad people there, were there, Grandma? No, sweetheart, there weren't. But I didn't know that. For those 10 minutes, it was completely real to me. Sarah leaned forward. What brought you out of it? The neighbor's dog started barking outside, and something about that sound pulled me back to reality. I realized I was standing there in my nightgown, holding a knife, and I had no idea why. I looked directly at David. That's when I knew something was really wrong. That's why I made the doctor's appointment. David was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse. You could have been hurt. If you'd thought the intruders were outside and you'd gone to investigate. I know. Believe me, I know. I squeezed Emma's hand. And if Emma had been there, if she'd heard me moving around and come to check on me, I would have been scared, Emma said simply. But I would have tried to help you. That's exactly what I was afraid of, David said. Emma, if Grandma is confused and has something that could hurt people, you can't try to help. You have to get away and call for adults. But what if Grandma needed me? The innocent question broke something open in my chest. This was the impossible situation David had been trying to navigate, protecting his daughter while not abandoning his mother. Emma, I said carefully, when Grandma's brain is confused like that, the best way to help me is to stay safe. Because if something happened to you while I wasn't thinking clearly, it would break my heart forever. She considered this seriously. So, staying safe is helping you. Exactly. David rubbed his face with both hands. Mom, I need to know, are these episodes getting worse, more frequent? I don't know yet. The doctor wants to run more tests, and we're trying a new medication. But David, I won't lie to you. I'm scared too. I'm scared of what's happening to my mind, and I'm scared of losing all of you because of it. You're not going to lose us, Sarah said firmly. But we do need to be smart about this. What does being smart look like? Emma asked. David looked at his daughter, then at me. It looks like making new rules for a while. Rules that keep everyone safe while we figure out what's going on with Grandma's health. Like what kind of rules? I asked, hopeful that we might be moving toward a solution. Like maybe you don't spend time alone with Emma until the doctors have a better handle on what's causing these episodes? But maybe that doesn't mean you can't see her at all. Emma perked up. You mean like how I can't use the stove by myself, but I can cook with you watching? Something like that, yes. I felt a flutter of possibility. So instead of me babysitting Emma alone, maybe she could come over when you or Sarah are there too? Or you could come to our house more often, David suggested. Emma could show you her room, we could cook together, watch movies. And we could still do puzzles? Emma asked hopefully. We could still do puzzles, I confirmed, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Sarah smiled. This sounds like a plan that works for everyone. But David held up a hand. There's one more thing. Mom, if you have another episode, or if you feel one coming on, you have to promise to call me immediately. Day or night. I promise. And if I'm with you, and I think you're having an episode, you have to trust me when I tell you, even if what you're experiencing feels completely real. That was harder to agree to, but I nodded. I promise that too. Emma had been listening to all of this with the focused attention that children bring to important adult conversations. So Grandma's brain is sick right now, but we're going to help her get better, and we're going to be extra careful while she's getting better? That's exactly right, David said. And I can still see her and hug her and tell her about school? Yes, you can. And make cookies? Despite everything, I laughed. Yes, we can still make cookies, though maybe with some supervision for a while. Emma considered all of this, then nodded decisively. Okay, I think that's a good plan. Looking at my family, my son who loved me enough to ask the hard questions, my daughter-in-law who helped bridge the gaps between us, and my granddaughter who saw straight to the heart of what mattered. I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more doctor's appointments, more difficult conversations, more adjustments to how we did things. But we would face it together, and that made all the difference. I love you all, I said, and meant it more than ever. We love you too, Grandma, Emma replied. All of you. Even the confused parts. And in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay.